So now let's back up a little bit and go over the different issues one by one. First thing you might want to consider about a new system is performing an extensive data collection. When I do this process, I typically organize a workshop, and the workshop might be a whole afternoon, and I would invite all the people that are involved with the current system. So not only the people that are on the user end, such as physicians and radiologists and specialists, but also the support people such as the IT. And then, of course, the people that use the system on a daily basis, the technologists, and also service and biomedical people, and the administration. And you find out that each group or each profession has a completely different viewpoint. I've seen actually systems that the radiologists were relatively happy, but the people that supporting the IT background were very unhappy because they were aware of some major potential issues. Or the other way around, that the support people thought this is a great system, but that physicians were unhappy. So we want to make sure that we get everybody involved, so we can look at all the aspects of the system, not only how it is performing, does it meet all the requirements, not only from a user perspective, but also from safety, patient privacy, support, and of course, does it meet the requirements for the administration? Is it costly, is it not costly, and things like that. So you want to get the multifunctional teams in a big room, and if you have a large institution that potentially even have multiple hospitals, it could be quite a big group. I've seen groups sometimes up to 40, 50 people. Now, if you have a relatively small institution, it might be just 10 to 15 people team. So you have one or multiple teams. You want to appoint a scribe, somebody that is kind of guiding that little team of 10, 15 people, and go through all the different components. And the components, the things you want to talk about, are the top 3 things, first of all, that are most annoying, time consuming, or what actually people hate the most. This feature, for example, it's very cumbersome, or I wish that this or this and this could work like that, or why do I need to make 5 keystrokes? And so is the way we can do this a little bit different. So you want to find out what are the most annoying, time consuming, the most critical issues. For example, another thing is changing, maybe from a support perspective, changing a patient name is a big thing, or merging 2 studies might be a major hassle or a major problem. So you want to make sure that you get all these problem areas or issues squared away and list them. Then second, you want to also look at that, the positive, of course. You want to look at the top 3 items that are the most valuable. That if somebody says, no, this thing is absolutely great, I could not live without. You know, these are the most valuable. If these things, actually, these are the top 3 things that I would buy the system for. Then, after you do the top 3, let's say worst and the top 3 best, then you want to list of features that you absolutely could not do without. For example, annotation, or the right template for speech recognition, or the use of templates with speech, with reporting. Features that are absolutely needed, that are absolutely say this is critical to my operation. After you have those top 3 good, top 3 bad, and a list of the 10 features, then each team goes and aggregates it. Let's say maybe take another hour or so, and you aggregate all the list and prioritize it with the whole group. Because there could still be some discrepancies between the different teams, assuming you have multiple teams to start with. Then, let's say the workshop organizer puts everything together, collects all the writings, all the sheets that people have produced, and then he or she will publish that, send it out for comments, because you will always find that 10 or 20% of the people that you really would like to have in a room could not make it a particular day because of conflicts. So you send it out, you take that information and you ask for comments. The second item, which is important as well, is re-engineering the workflow. If this was your first PACS system, you might have done some initially workflow assessment and re-engineering. However, if you are not too familiar, and in many cases you weren't, if you're not too familiar with how a PACS system would operate, it is really hard to re-engineer a system if you don't know really how the ultimate operation could be. Now, by using a PACS system already for several years, or the RIS system for several years, you gained a lot of experience and you know much better what are the capabilities and what are the opportunities in re-engineering the workflow. Now, it's also a little bit of dangerous because some systems prescribe a certain workflow that you think that is the only way that you can do certain things. However, other PACS systems might actually be more flexible and also facilitate other workflows. And these all have to do with, for example, making images available in the worklist, holding out images available, doing QA steps, things like that. So the second time around, it's even a better opportunity to re-engineer the workflow. And of course, you do that by documenting it and you analyze it. And then when you look at the workflow, you analyze it not only from a patient perspective, find out what all the steps are that a patient has to go through, but also from a physician perspective, a radiologist perspective as well. And then also you want to look independently of the stream of all the images and the related information as well as the reports. So you actually have different workflows. And then you might want to optimize it depending on your requirements. Some institutions want to optimize it certain areas for certain people. For example, in the ER, it's pretty common to try to optimize it for the patient. If in your case your strategic objective is to limit the turnaround time or reduce the turnaround time in the ER. Other ERs, they might not necessarily be focused on reducing the turnaround time for the patient, but maybe for radiologists and physicians, if they are bound by limitation in the amount of physicians and radiologists that they have available. So depending on the requirements, you can then take the workflow and re-engineer it. So you want to benchmark it against requirements for, of course, throughput. What are your requirements for that? Throughput maybe for a procedure, throughput for a visit, or actually a throughput for a patient stay. Then you also want to look at turnaround time and look at some other desired key indicators. And the key indicator might be, who knows, cost, efficiency, personnel, things like that. So whatever the key indicators are. The key indicators you pick, you want to prioritize. Again, like I mentioned before, it might be efficiency in the ER, patient wait time, or physician turnaround time. Depending on who it is that you want to please the most, depends on how you want to operate your organization and what is your requirements. Another key important component is whether you want to find out that there's limitations in the current product that dictate certain workflows. And the only way to find that out is to do some study or some research and talk with some other users. And hey, how do you use your PACS system? How do you use your RIS system? How is it that you can be some more efficient than we are? And then take some of the benchmarks as well. There's some benchmarks provided by AMA and other organizations that say, well, this is typically the throughput, and this is typically the cost, and this is typically how the majority of the institutions operate. And you also want to review policies and procedures. You want to challenge them. If this is the way it's being done, why is it the way it's being done? There's a lot of details on downtime procedures, on backups. For example, if the current procedure is that you make a tape backup every day, maybe with a new system you can actually substitute that tape backup by having an automatic backup made over connection to an application service provider, to an ASP. Or there are a lot of opportunities for optimizing the workflow if you look at all the individual policies and the way you do things right now, and then look at potential new systems capabilities. Now, a bottleneck in many institutions, and not only a bottleneck, also a source for potential issues not working correctly. And anyway, this bottleneck is quite often the import and export of the data. In many institutions, there's definitely an increase in the amount of data that patients bring to the institutions. They might have had an MRI or CT done at another location, or I don't know, even at the same institution, but before they had a PACS system. So you might want to reevaluate definitely the import and export rules and how that's being handled. Now let's start with the export. So first of all, where do we create CDs? There are opportunities to centralize that. For example, now say, well, all the CDs are created in a file room, and some PACS systems actually allow physicians, technologists, and whoever is authorized to create another copy that actually some PACS systems allow that to be done remotely, by which you can just start to say, I want for this patient, this exam, a CD to be generated. At the file room, you start the job and you can tell the patient, pick it up at the file room where then the proper authorization forms and sign-out sheets and things are taken care of. So creating the CDs, or not only the CDs, but in the future some electronic media, other media, you might want to think about, is it centralized or do you decentralize it? Maybe you want to do it at every entrance, like at the front desk or in the ER, or give it to the receptionist. Think about, based on the workflow, where you want to do that. And make sure that they're all 200% compliant. What I mean with 200%, it's make them more compliant than they would be compliant. So make sure that they're as compliant as they can be. Because in many cases still, there are CDs created that might not necessarily meet all the different requirements of the DICOM interchange standard. And so the last thing you want to do is send your patients with a CD home, and then they go to another location, and then the other location has trouble reading them in because they're not quite yet compliant. And then again, think about exchange services. If you know that if you refer a lot of patients to, let's say, another larger institution, you might want to consider establishing a relationship with another institution and set up a VPN, virtual private network, and just exchange that information electronically. Instead of having to create a CD and then a CD to be carried by a patient, replace the sneakerware with an electronic connection. Of course, you need to then also make sure that this is, again, not only meeting all the requirements for privacy security, but also that the way you exchange the information is done in a standard way. Otherwise, you are replacing the problem from not being able to read a CD to not be able to read the image that was received electronically. So with regard to the import, who takes these CDs? Do we want to again centralize it, decentralize it? Is it the PACS administrator? Is it the technologist? Is it the front receptionist? Is it the front desk? So rethink about who's doing that, and then what location. Then of course you will never take a CD and just upload the data from the CD straight into your PACS system, because there could be a potential conflict, particularly with the patient name, the IDs, and some of your identifiers that you use in your own system. The identifiers that are typically used in your radiology department will be an accession number, for example. So you want to make sure that you will reconcile the data that is imported with the data from your PACS system, so there's no potential conflict. Also rethink about where you want those images to be stored. Do you want to be stored on the only short-term archive? Do you want them automatically removed? So how long is it accessible? And take into consideration also the business model of your new system. If you have to pay for each image that is being stored, and there's a patient that comes for a follow-up CT and takes with him like 20 disks with prior CTs, and you also have to pay for storing those 20 prior CDs, you need to be aware of that. And take that to an account, so that makes sure that for that particular patient there will be a higher cost involved. So what about the electronic data transfer? It will not be too long before patients, instead of having a CD, they will just give you the authentication and authorization to access the personal health record, where you as a user can have access to all the information of that patient, including the images. So it probably will happen first when you have an integrated delivery network, an IDN, because in that case you don't necessarily have any competition rules, and you might be willing freely to share that information, but obviously also you want to make sure that you can connect with the electronic health records and the personal health records and other services as well. There are actually commercial services that you can engage in and use it as a temporary data transfer service, and they take care of the secure exchange, so to speak, almost like a post office or a mail service for your images. One of the things you might want to also anticipate is the hardware and software changes. With regard to the hardware and software changes, there will be definitely new software updates and operating system. It changes every 3 years or so. So there are some relatively minor changes, let's say from release 6.3 to 6.4, but at some point in time there might actually be major changes, not only from release 6 but release to 7, which is a major change, and that will be to the order of completely changing the operating system or having different functionality. Now, how are these covered? Do you have to pay for those? You should anticipate it because the changes will occur. And some of the differences will also include higher resolution. More and more the technology is not standing still, so you get higher resolution detectors. And that means higher resolution data that you will have to facilitate. There's going to be higher resolution monitors. There's also already 10 megapixels and multiple 10 megapixel screens. And there will be more data for modalities, of course. 64 slice CT scanner is pretty common, but most it might be 320 within the next future couple of years. And then, of course, new modalities. So new standard extensions such as the electronic medical record and IHC DICOM will come along. And then also new applications. There might be a new fusion of new modalities, MRI PET for example. So new applications that require upgrades and changes that needs the requirement to facilitate it. Not only of the PACS system itself, but also on some of the plugins. If you're using a speech recognition today, I'm sure that will be upgraded as well. Hardware changes will definitely take place as well. CPU potential, but definitely memory requirements. You might need to upgrade it from another 2 gigabytes to facilitate even larger data sets and even higher resolutions. New disk capacities and operating system upgrades, as well as database upgrades. Now, when I look at some of the systems in hospitals, in many cases, the owner of the system will be very proud, show off this big cabinet and says, listen, look how many terabytes I have here. That will take care of the next 5 years of storage. And I always have to wonder, why would you ever want to buy 5 years of storage? Because that means that you have definitely paid too much, because the next year you can probably double the amount of storage for half the price. So don't buy too much. Plan ahead, and let's say maybe you buy for 1 or 2 years ahead, and then plan at that time to look at your storage capacity and then buy the latest and greatest higher density disks, and that I'm sure will be less expensive. Now, with regard to the request for proposal, make sure you create a request for proposal, even although it's relatively small or limited. If you don't have requirements of your system, there's no way you can actually prove or find out whether the system meets your requirements. It doesn't have to be too long. Don't spend, like I've seen RFPs of 500-600 pages. That is definitely an overkill. But create a 30-50 page RFP, request for proposal, and don't ask a vendor to specify, information about commodity components anyway. For example, monitors are more or less commodities. So if you think about diagnostic monitors, don't necessarily zoom in on the really detailed requirements of the glass, so to speak, because many cases the vendors are all the same for that anyway, but focus on the additional features such as, again, for monitors, the capability to do remote calibration, for example, and things like that. So focus definitely on the workflow and integration requirements. Describe what your institution, how it currently operates, and how the physicians and the users and the technologists like to use the system and how they use it today, if they use it today. And one of the issues quite often occur when an existing workflow has to be replaced with a different workflow, and particularly if that different workflow is not necessarily as efficient, we want to make sure that you don't come into that situation. So focus with your RFP on workflow and integration requirements. With regard to the contract as well, it's very likely that you have had questions or things that occurred and that you thought would be covered by the vendor, or that you want to do different. And so take the opportunities and look at all the issues and disputes that came up, and this guide and at this time do a better job of covering that in the agreement. And then, even if you don't necessarily hire a consultant for the RFP process, as a minimum, I would suggest getting a consultant for the contract. Not necessarily somebody that is versed with the legal terminology like a lawyer, but somebody that is really knowledgeable about the PACS and RIS systems in detail. And of course, you might want to include an arbitration clause that says if the system is not accepted within 6 months after so-and-so date, then you might want to have the money back, or you might want to go to an arbitration, in front of an arbitration judge and find out what really happened and who will be right. So you would kind of resolve some of the yes-no situations. And again, worst case, you might want to actually include money back guarantee in case the vendor cannot perform. Particularly important if you have a vendor that is not necessarily one of the mainstay vendors. If you have let's say a relatively small vendor that looks really attractive because potentially they have a lower price point, or they promise a better service or a certain functionality that they can custom build for you, in that case it's even more important to make sure that you're covered by a non-performance, because they might not necessarily always be able to perform. And so status performance requirements very clearly. Non-compliance should be based on very clearly statements such as a certain delivery date, certain acceptance date, certain turnaround times, things like that. And then of course in the contract you might want to have a very detailed section about upgrades and extensions and what will be extra charges. Just as a simple example, an extra 807 or DICOM interface could be potentially pretty expensive. So you might want to anticipate those upfront and negotiate that as part of the contract. An important part is the test system. A test system will be a RIS simulator and a capability to create test transactions. The good news is that 807 as a standard allows you actually to create messages that are identified as test messages so people know to ignore them. So if you get a test order, people know, okay, I'm not going to look for Jane Smith in the waiting room to do an x-ray, but they know it's a test message. So I'm placing an order for Jane Smith. So RIS simulator and the capability to create the test transactions are very important, and also a worklist provider for the modality. And then also, if you have a vendor that might want to come in to do a demo of the latest and greatest product, demo for example for a week, you want to have the capability to pull down a test worklist to test that component as well. So get a test broker, test worklist, and have it set up to provide the test worklists. And obviously you need to have a test PACS server, but you don't necessarily need a lot of capacity, maybe just a few days or a week. You might want to poll the users to find out what is acceptable if the system goes down in case of, let's say, scheduled maintenance. In many cases the users, let's say that happens for Saturday, Sunday, over the weekend, in many cases the users will tell you that they're happy as long as they can see maybe the images from the last week and the reports from anything older, for example, just for this particular occurrence of this scheduled downtime. Now, of course, this doesn't happen a lot. It might happen maybe once every 2 years or so. But in those cases, you want to find out what is acceptable for the user to still operate. Another important component of a test system would be the capability to duplicate reports, also having alternate image access. For example, let's say the PACS might go down for whatever reason. There might be a hardware issue, and if in addition there's always a copy of the images on the web server, and then a user can always go to any PC and log in via some kind of web access and still have access to the images, that would be a good backup strategy as well. You also want to have test modalities and simulated modalities, and it could be as simple as having a computer somewhere with a DICOM send capability, so you can simulate sending images. For example, if you get a new modality coming in, you might want to call the manufacturer and say, give me a CD of these new images, put it on the test simulator, and you can test your system. You want lots of images, lots of test images to test the pipeline, and the images are available, test images from integrating the healthcare enterprise. And just as an example, to test your digital mammography system, there are lots of test images that give all the different views and with all the different view code modifiers, and it's very hard to be able, it would actually take probably days to simulate all these images, and they're all available, as well as from the AAPM for testing your calibration and your monitor performance. Another thing you want to have installed is sniffer capability and network tools and validation tools. A sniffer will allow you to track problems that might not necessarily be as reproducible, and you need to be able to go back, let's say, to a certain time period where a certain event occurred, such as a timeout or aborting a transmission, and you want to find out what exactly happened using a sniffer, so you can go then back to the vendors and do some troubleshooting. Validation tools as well and network monitoring tools are very important. If you did not have those available, make sure that you include them now with your next go around.